is Australia.
This fucking language.
Let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned. But I ain't spending any time on it.
Give him a Valium. Don't stop wearing the Speedos.
You're listening to Decode, Betoota Advocate's new podcast series for those Australians who have tuned out or never tuned in to the dark arts of federal politics.
It's called being, you wouldn't believe it, a goddamn bloody adult.
Welcome to our second interview profile of the Betoota Advocate's new Decode series, a podcast that aims to break down the spin and sift through the bullshit that is federal politics. I'm Clancy and Errol, editor of the Betoota Advocate.
And I'm Errol Parker.
Now, today's guest is a heavyweight of the coalition, the Minister for Agriculture in Northern Australia. He's a federal member for the division of Maranoa, an electorate that covers the entirety of southwest Queensland from Warwick, 130 kilometres west of Brisbane, to the Northern Territory and South Australian borders. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show the Thrilla From Chinchilla, Betoota's own local member, David Littleproud. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, boys. Good to be with you.
Now, obviously this interview isn't in person because we've caught you at quite a busy time in Canberra. What's going on today down there?
Look, yeah, well, it's always madness when you're here, mate. No good can come of us being in Canberra. There's 270-odd egos running around in one room. So not a great thing, but look, especially as a government. But we're going through, obviously, the religious discrimination bill today. And Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins are speaking at the press club at lunchtime. And so very newsworthy stuff happening in Canberra, which isn't always the way.
Now, is everyone down there focused on the task at hand, which is obviously governing our nation out of this relentless pandemic, or does it feel like the election campaign started? What's the feeling?
Oh, look, the election campaign started all right. I mean, with Albo and Scott running around the countryside straight after Christmas, I think the bar's been set. So let's not kid ourselves. And obviously, despite all the titillations that have been in the media recently about text messages and all that sort of stuff, at a granular level in a room, we don't talk about that. We actually talk about the fact that we're going to go into caretaker mode in probably 7 or 8 weeks. And we're just trying to make sure we get stuff done, get it completed, the stuff that we want to get done. So we're sort of on a timeline. So that's really the focus at the moment, is making sure we get stuff done.
So what does campaigning look like in the seat of Maranoa? I mean, like, you're obviously one of the safest seats in Parliament. What do you do in campaign mode?
Look, the one thing you don't do is door knock. I think you would actually lose votes in Maranoa if you went and knocked on someone's door.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do is...
especially in this day and age.
Yeah, exactly. So, mate, what I like to do is just, you sort of go to a town, you pull up, you walk the streets, have a yarn to some of the businesses, go and have a feed at the pub, see who's there, have a yarn, then move on to the next town and sort of recycle that all day, every day. And then, always make sure, even when we're not campaigning, I always have a rule, 5 to 6:30, whatever town I'm in, I've got to go to the local pub and just listen to the locals and have a few with them. And then obviously they know you've been in town, but you get the real people. You think you might be pretty hot when you leave here, but I can tell you the locals in Maranoa bring you down pretty quick. They call you a wanker and all sorts of things before you've even finished your first schooner.
Yeah.
Honest people.
You're a wanker, but I'll still vote for you.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
Now, it seems your family's kind of been involved in rural politics for generations. Your grandfather, George, served in the Chinchilla Local Council. Your old man served as a Queensland State Minister under Sir Joe, and now you've taken the Littleproud surname to Canberra. What is it about politics that attracted you, your old man, and his old man?
Yeah, well, look, I never knew my grandfather. He died before I was alive. He had a complication, died quite young. But my dad got involved primarily because when he died young, Whitlam had the death taxes.
Yeah.
And then my grandmother, and he was running the farms, and he was actually a school teacher as well. We had to sell property and nearly lost it all. And so Dad became probably politically motivated then, and then got into state politics. And obviously Joe made it very clear that he wanted to get rid of death taxes as part of a competitive federation. And that attracted Dad. And he actually was one of the ones that actually called Joe up and said it was time for him to retire. He wasn't a minister under the Bjelke-Petersen government. He was only under the Ahern, because he just felt that Joe had probably come to an end and it was time that we moved forward as a national party. And then I got into it because of my dad. He's the one person I look up to. He's the guy that I try to base my life and my political career on. And so I got into it and always had an interest because of him. And he was always about service to the community. So he was, in the cricket club, the Apex, the Rotaries and all that. And I've always liked that as well, because I've never lived in the capital city and no intention to, but those things sort of drive you in little towns and you become part of the community and you give something back. So I'd always had an interest. And when Bruce Scott decided he was going to retire after 26 years, I had a crack and I became the member, and Barnaby made me the Ag Minister about 18 months into it, which was sort of a bit of a shock. And I can tell you there was a few mental demons to get over question time, but now every day is a bonus for me.
Yeah.
Now, as a bloke who worked as a rural bank manager during the Millennium Drought, I'm surprised you don't have a few more bullet holes in you. Can you tell us what you learnt in that role at that time?
Yeah, look, I'm the only one in cabinet that doesn't have a university degree, and I'm probably the youngest. I left school. I was a cotton chipper. And then the National Bank took me up and I just worked out in Western Queensland, Charleville and Cunnamulla and St George and places like that. The one thing you learn was humility and humanity. You were seeing people at the depths of despair, and what the challenge was to try to navigate them with some dignity and respect. And that was difficult because there's a lot of emotion. What was happening in those drought years was, these people were basically going to lose the lot. I remember, weekends, the bank manager, I was just an assistant. He'd come and pick us up in the bank car, and a couple of the young bank fellas, and put us in the car with a carton of stubbies, and we'd have to go on the side of roads and catch up with the farmers because they have to have their stock. They had no feed on their properties. Yeah. They were driving these cattle up and down and sheep up and down road, and we'd have to go and talk to them about, mate, you're behind. We're going to have a tough conversation. And the carton of stubbies wasn't necessarily for us. It was actually to sit there and show some dignity and respect to them and try to work through it with them. And that was probably the first lesson I got, real lesson in life, in seeing people in the depths of despair coming in. And I had a woman come in and see me, and she asked, I was probably 19, 20. She came into the bank in a branch and she had sunglasses on, and for obvious reason, and she asked for $50. Her pension was coming in, or her drought payment was coming in tomorrow, but she had nothing in the cupboard for her kids, and she was, a 35, 40-year-old mother that, was in despair. And here I was, a 19-year-old kid, had to make a decision. I just thought, well, that's how life can be cruel to you sometimes. I was in a privileged position and I should use it properly, but she was going to hell and back, and and obviously her husband was not happy, and they were just in a terrible spot, and just to ask for $50. It sort of wakes you up to say that you've probably been pretty lucky in life.
Well, speaking of helping people, David, in as few words as possible, what does the National Party stand for moving forward?
Simply looking after regional rural Australia. Mate, there's enough politicians in the cities running around. It's just about us getting their fair share. And that's all it is. We feel as though we're forgotten Australians sometimes. And that's not intentional. That's not intentional by the other parties. They're all good people. And I got good mates in the Labor Party, and I got good mates in the Liberal Party. But their focus hasn't and isn't necessarily on regional Australia. And our job's just to remind them that, you know what, you spend $1 in our part of the world, it actually goes a fair way. And that's the thing is, my job is to actually remind them both of that. And I've got to say, at times I've had wins on both. So I come to this place not trying to tear anyone down, but to bring regional Australia up.
Now, we won't go into the leaked text messages, all that shit that kind of rattled the government over the weekend. The media got into a spin over it, but it does lead us to, the next question, which is, given everything that is happening, this is the decode element of this podcast. We need to ask you, in your mind, how does the arrangement work? When I say that, what is the structure of this coalition between the National Party and the Liberal Party?
It's transactional. Now, while we've been together for 90-odd years, there's been one time when we pulled it apart. But effectively, it is transactional. And so there's a lot of things that we do align on. And I've got to say, there's things that the National Party, in terms of ethos, because we're the old agrarian socialists, there's things that we actually align sometimes with the Labor Party. But on many of the economic issues, we really do align with the Liberals, but with a sprinkle of making sure that the purity of the market sometimes need government intervention. And that's where we come from as Nats, because invariably, because we don't have that mass in the bush, then markets can sometimes give us a poo sandwich. So, we've got to make sure we're able to temper that when we inject ourselves, and sometimes simply just say no. Yeah. Sorry, you can't have that, or because if you don't give us this. And that's the transactional nature, but it's a cooperative one. We've had a couple of Barneys and a couple of Blues, but that's good. That's actually healthy. Yeah. I don't mind that. I don't mind a bit of a stoush. Don't mind dancing with them sometimes and sort of go, right, on this one, sorry, you're not going to get it unless you give us this. And that's what gets our fair share. And you have to do that. It can't be all kumbaya, and it never will be.
Well, speaking of communism, David, a lot of our produce in Maranoa ends up in China, and our relationship with China at the moment is quite strained through no fault of the National Party. Kind of moving forward into this next term of government, what plans are in place for the Nationals to re-establish our relationship with Chinese markets?
Well, we made it clear and I've made it clear to my counterpart that my door's always open, my phone's always on, but there are rules in which we have to re-engage in terms of respect. We're not going to trade away our sovereignty. There's been over 100,000 Australians that have lost their lives protecting our democracy and our sovereignty and our way of government. And so we won't give up on that. And if they respect that and understand, I'm more than comfortable to work through a pathway of dialogue. And that's why my phone is on and doors always open, because dialogue is the best way to resolve any difference. So we'll continue to do that. But what we're also going to do is make sure we diversify market spread risks. And as an old bank manager, I can tell you that's one of the things is you shouldn't have market concentration. We used to say that, to the coffees. Well, where you're selling your grain, where you sell your cotton, you're spreading your risk. Yeah. So that's why we're pumping money into making sure that we can spread risk, get new markets, and we have. Indonesia, UK, Dan's on his way to India, Dan Tame. So, that's what you've got to do, but you've got to treat one another with respect. I'm a big believer that trade will bring the peace and prosperity globally, and that can only be achieved through dialogue. And so I'm stand ready, and the Nats stand ready, but we'll make sure that we're never going to sell out any of the values and principles of this country. That's what makes us great.
I mean, that's obviously an important point you make there about, not bowing. But, at the same time, there is a lot of populism and poking at the bear, you could argue, the drums of war, the khaki election. Is there a feeling in the National Party that, and not just with China, but in general, that every fuck up, every scandal coming out of Cronulla is tied to you?
Not necessarily, but I got to say that there was some apprehension when obviously there was some statements made about China, because we understand the bush was our major market, and we understood that, concerned about it. But I'm not part of the National Security Committee, so I'm not privy to the intelligence that comes through, but to a granular level. But the more and more that I've seen, and then when they released the 14 demands that they expected us to live up to before they'd come and talk to us, was a line in the sand that I felt they'd crossed, and happy if they had to retreat to start talking again. But so too with many people in regional rural Australia, particularly farmers. They didn't want to relent and give up our sovereignty or our democracy in any way. So we haven't had any pushback from China, and I have to say the decisions that I've been able to see subsequent around that have been predicated on intelligence, not on politics, and I think that's where the opposition would be as well. This is where bipartisanship is important. The only difference between us and the opposition on that is about how we would engage in that dialogue, and that's the only difference. I think we try to make this bipartisan, and it should be. This is our nation's sovereignty.
Now that Malcolm Turnbull is back where he belongs at Goldman Sachs, which member of Parliament has the most cattle? It was always that Malcolm Turnbull, had a couple thousand head of the belted Galways, whatever they were, in the Hunter Valley, and he always used to say that he had the most cattle out of anyone in Parliament. Who do you think is now the boss ringer of Parliament?
Yeah. Well, I think it's Mark Colton. I'm pretty sure he just bought another block, and I know he's always Instagramming him bloody mustering his cattle. So I reckon Colton's got us all covered at the moment. I've only got a little cultivation block that's a little loose, and so I'm out of that one.
With some watermelons, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a chinchilla, but I love the story last week about that. Mike was waiting for the melon.
Yeah.
Yeah, the watermelon shot put is my favourite event out there on the Watermelon Festival. Now, I want to go back to this idea of the broad tent, the broad church, the big tent, the ideology within the coalition. Because, we in Betoota have a good understanding of the politics in Western Queensland. We know your predecessor, Bruce Scott. We know the state member, Lockie Miller. We know a fair few of the mayors. We definitely know the Catters. So to be fair to say, as you mentioned before, there's a pretty noticeable bent of social conservatism in the bush. But there's also that sprinkling of, agrarian socialism. We start talking about grants and we talk about, help for primary producers or miners or whoever facing the elements. How do you marry that? Because the moderate liberal ethos, the one that they're actually trying to put forward now because they're worried about the independence in the inner city and they want to look like these small L kind of turquoise liberals, that actually is the complete opposite of what you guys represent in the bush. There's that free love, marry who you want, open the borders, but no safety net for anyone who needs help. That's kind of the feeling you get from this modern new liberal.
Yeah, and look, I think the bush is changing too. We're becoming more urbanised. I mean, the elastic-sided boot politician that just represents farmers is changing. Like, I've probably got the most dispersed electorate, 43% of Queensland. But even you go into those towns like Warwick or even Longreach, there's many young families there that aren't tied to agriculture. They're tied to probably much of the same values and principles that they do in metro areas, but there is still that conservative nature that runs through.
You put the no back in Maranoa.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but this is the thing. There were Sydney seats that had a higher no vote than Maranoa.
Yeah.
And you know what? One of the best stories I heard through that whole story was someone from The Guardian was out and was at Roma and talked to this young guy who'd moved from Melbourne and he was gay and this journo was trying to say, well, mate, how do you live in Roma? Like you couldn't live here. This is the conservative hotbed. He said, mate, I'm safer in Roma than I am in Melbourne. These people really don't care whether I'm whatever. They just, so long as I contribute to the community, you're part of it. And I thought that was a really, really good insight into how we live. And they get this persona that where there's some conservative hotbed where we're all rednecks and chew straw and hay bales.
Yeah. But, you ever met a shearer's cook?
Yeah, there's a couple, yeah. So look, I agree. I mean, that's where the competitive tension in making sure, but in terms of the evolution of where we're going, our farmers are now thinking more and more about the climate. I just introduced a bill today that I created myself on a biodiversity stewardship to pay farmers not just for carbon but for improvement in biodiversity. It's a world first. And Nat's come up with that, not a Lib, not a Teal independent, but a National Party. Because my farmers are telling me that. And on markets, I've got to say, when I was in the bank, 10 years ago, they were all about protectionism. Now they see that the free market's giving them a better return. But what my concern is and what our farmers' concerned are is not necessarily international markets. It's actually some of our own corporates like the supermarkets who have exploited our farmers for far too long. That's where I want to square the ledger, where we've got these big corporates that go and tell our farmers, go and buy all this land, develop all this land, and we'll give you, we'll take all your crop. And then all of a sudden they turn around and go, oh, no, we found someone else down the road we're going to take it from. And then they've made all this capital investment, they go broke. And that's not conduct. That's not what Australian corporates should do. And that's where, I've really got problems with corporate Australia at times, and I get on my high horse on them. There's a couple of them, supermarkets and telcos, Telstra in particular, they're the worst run corporates in Australia. Yeah.
What is the on the ground issue right now? Aside from you remove the industrial kind of, what are the people telling you in the pub? I mean, you can talk about ag, you can talk about mining, but what is the personal kind of gripes that are being put in front of you?
Yeah, out in Maranoa, it's we haven't been hit by COVID, but they want it out of their lives. They actually just want to be able to have the freedom to be able to move interstate or go into Brisbane without have all these restrictions. I think that's really what they want. They're making a quid. I mean, we've had probably one of the best seasons we've had in a long time with a few isolated blocks that missed out, but they're pretty happy. And I've got to say, they're happy because we haven't been hit by COVID. And credit where credit's due. I think the Queensland government, they went the hard way in terms of locking everyone out. And that's kept everyone happy. And so you've got to give credit where credit's due. That's worked. And I think, there was courage from the Premier to open up the borders. She had to show some courage, and she did it, and good on her. So I think that all they want now is government out of their lives. They're making $1. We don't ask for a lot. Commodities are good, rain's good, tourists are good. So if you went through Maranoa at the moment, it's basically making sure they got the roads and the telecommunications. That's probably the biggest gripe I get. I probably get more complaints about Telstra than anyone or anything else going around. So our lot in life's pretty good because we're spending some money out there, but it's just those connectivity pieces that'll finish us. But we're a sort of a microcosm out there compared to what's in the city. Our shelves are always got food on it, and ours will, and the cities will too. It's just a matter of getting over this Omicron piece.
Do you agree with this narrative that's being bandied around that throughout the pandemic, and now that we're talking about that, the role of the federal government has shrunk in the way it handles that?
Yeah, mate, I think we've got a real lesson in federation. See, our job since federation was to collect taxes and protect the borders.
Yeah.
And the states, what federation was to be competitive. And it was created so our forefathers didn't want 8 or 9 different nations within Australia, but they had their own sovereignty. And I think what we're getting is a real education in that federation and the powers the states have. They manage the resources, they own the resources, they give the health orders. And what we try to do is, and what Morrison tried to do was to bring it together in a national cabinet so we had a national approach. But it was always going to be difficult because, the states wanted to go off on different directions, not just for politics, but for their own circumstances. Because Queensland's circumstances was, in all honesty, different to the outbreaks in New South Wales and Victoria. So also the premiers were going to go off on different tangents. So I think this is an education in our system, because what happens in our education system at the moment is you go year 6, you get taught about it, you might get a trip to Canberra in the snow, and then you forget about it, and all you want is something to happen. You want governments just to make sure the roads there, the doctors are there, the hospitals are there, teachers are there. You don't really care whether it's state or federal government that does it, but I think this is just bringing it back where people are getting that education and federation of what our political system is.
So moving to this upcoming election in May, what's the biggest priority for the Nationals?
Bringing our young people home, mate, and just getting a fair share. Like, I grew up in a little place called Chinchilla, and, we've lost generations of young people, and I get they've all wanted to go to the shiny lights of the city, but the amenity of life, if we provide it and getting the infrastructure, is better in regional areas. I think some are actually really experiencing that themselves due to COVID. They've realised living in a 50 square metre unit isn't all that great, but living in Roma or Chinchilla or Warwick or Kingaroy isn't too bad. So we've got to make sure that we get our fair share in terms of the infrastructure to support that, but also career pathways and making sure that we open up new opportunities for them to come home, whether it be in ag or whether it be in research and technology. And that's why investing in regional universities is important to us, so that our young people know you don't have to come back and work on a farm. You can come back and do something else. And you can have, and we're keeping that best and brightest. And that's the thing that has always driven me and always shit me, is that we've lost those young people. And I've never lived outside Maranoa, and my legacy needs to be that the next generation that live, whether in Longreach or Chinchilla or Warwick, they don't have to go away. They can stay out there and we can educate them. They can have a career pathway. They can raise their family. They can make a quid, and they can be great Australians.
Well, I was in Longreach the other day, and there's a new cafe there that looks like it's straight out of New Farm. I mean,
mate,
people are coming home,
It's not just the Betoota bitter; it's also the lattes out there now.
Yeah. No, it's all. I mean, there is a big post-COVID decentralisation. You might have noticed that Warwick's being pitched as the new bloody Mornington Peninsula, the Southern Downs. There's a lot of tree change happening. Is there also the infrastructure for that? Say if you do get that wave, say if, a hypothetical is the Japanese are in the harbours again and everyone has to go bush, do you have the infrastructure for that?
Well, look, I've got to say our roads networks has increased exponentially, and that's a partnership between federal and state. I think the biggest constraint, there's two big constraints for us. One is telecommunications in mobility. I think NBN's got better. Even the satellites got better. Making sure we just got that mobility of mobile phone towers. Housing is an issue. You know, I've got some communities now where there's only 2 or 3 houses available. Housing stock's gone down. So helping local and state government get that stock up. You go to Quilpie, you know, we've got a local government out at Quilpie. They opened up, I think it was 20 or 30 blocks and were selling them for $100. If you came out and built a house on it, like that's the sort of ingenuity you get in the bush, and if you empower local governments to do that, they'll do it themselves. And that's where I think our job as state and federal governments is to help them do that. And we have got the amenity. I mean, you go to some of these country towns now, like you can get a better coffee there than you can in Sydney or Melbourne. You know, you got water parks, you got all these things that we're building out here, and the schools are getting better. They're actually, most schools have got, most towns have got a private school, and I'm safer in a Chinchilla or a Warwick or a Kingaroy. If something happens to me, the local hospital look after me until the chopper comes and picks me up. I don't sit on the ramp in a hospital in Brisbane. I'm actually flying onto the roof and I go straight to a bed. I've got first class service all the way. I mean, so we're not disadvantaged. And then I think this is the narrative we've also got to get through is we're not disadvantaged living out there. We're not a charity case. We need our fair share, and people will come.
Well, thank you for joining us today, David Littleproud. I just want to finish with one question. In your time campaigning through the bush, what do you think's the wildest pub you've walked into in all of the Maranoa?
Oh, yeah. I think the good old birdcage at Longreach. Gav Basket out there runs a great pub, a lot of fun, and it's always harmless fun, but you can't go past the birdcage.
We would have said Longreach as well, but the pub's burnt down since then, the old Lyceum.
Yeah, the old Lyceum.
Yeah. I think
with old Lethal he used to run that. He used to keep his F-250 out the front with his number plates out the back.
Exactly,
Yeah, any pub that's a tinder box on a Friday night is likely to burn down at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today, David, and all the best for the hand grenades that are going to roll into the coalition in about 2 hours when Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins get on stage.
Yeah, and look, that's fair. And look, we've just got to work through this together on both sides. And I've got to say down here, both sides are working through that, and it has been good. It's not just a coalition problem, it's all our problem. Yeah. And I think that's what you'd expect us to do is fix that together.
Mm-hmm. And also, is there any move to move all, internal correspondence onto Wicker or any kind of encryption apps?
Signal. Got a Signal now, yeah.
There you go.
Thanks for joining us, mate. All the best.
Thanks for having me, boys.
Thanks, Dave.